and welcome to InteSoul Leadership. It's my pleasure, Yvette Owens, to come to you every week to talk about leadership and how you can elevate as a leader and influence those around you to elevate in their spaces of influence, their purpose, their potential, so that your organizations become greater and you catapult into a flourishing organization where you meet the vision and mission that you want to in the marketplace, in the community, even in ministry. It's my pleasure today to bring to you Victor Dos Santos of SageSure Insurance. He's the president there of commercial insurance. We've had working relationships before, but he's a tremendous leader. And I want to welcome you, Victor, to share with our audience today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Yvette. Pleasure to be here. Appreciate the kind words. By the way, congratulations on your retirement from Travelers and your new entrepreneurship with DestinySpeak. I think it's wonderful what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Nothing's ever wasted, right? And my 43 years in Travelers was really a great experience. I was blessed to never be without work and got to learn and know a lot of great people like yourself. I'm reaching out and I want to really help leaders today who are in a different terrain than we've ever seen before and how they can really continue to grow and help their organizations grow, how they should approach the position of a leader. And I know that you bring a wealth of experience and wisdom to that space. So today we're talking about vision and strategy, about recruiting and development of the team, and how do we build up resiliency in that space? So why don't we start off by you sharing more about the whole vision piece and strategy piece. How do we make sure we approach that well?
Sure. I think the first thing that I ask myself, in my current position is where do I want my company to be and what does it do differently that creates a competitive advantage? And I think this type of thing can translate really to just about any job at any level, and I'll talk about that further. But just specifically using my example right now, when I joined SageSure in 2018, we had to basically design what we were going to do with commercial insurance. It historically had been a company that did homeowners insurance, focused mostly on coastal homeowners, and wanted to bring that expertise to the commercial space. The first thing that I asked myself is, what is it that our company does and why does it do it so well? What's its competitive advantage? And our expertise is really around understanding the coastal risk and predominantly, at least historically, the hurricane risk, and understand that so that we can price that better, underwrite it better, and make the appropriate returns for our stakeholders in such a way that we can be resilient and continue as a company in the long run, right? There are plenty of companies that can do it for a while and then something happens and they don't last. That was really what our mission was. And then we wanted to do that in such a way that we were bringing some innovation to the marketplace and continually enhancing what we do, and do it in such a way that we can bring options to our customers. So our tagline mission is, we pioneer ways people protect their American dream. There's a lot of important words there, right? The pioneer, the protect, and the American dream being homes and businesses. And so what's our competitive advantage? What makes us do what we do better? Well, it's really understanding the risk better. And then it's also bringing multiple sources of capital. We're a managing general underwriter, which means that we underwrite the risk for other companies that are actually the risk takers, the paper, if you will, the insurance companies behind the risk. And we have more than one company that we bring to the marketplace. So by doing that, we can move the risk and balance the risk among the different companies, which is good for the companies, but also good for the customers because the customers have more options. A long-winded example of saying, what do you do and what's your competitive advantage? And I think if you're in any level of leadership, you ought to be asking yourself that. So if you're somebody running a department of just 3 people or something, what is it that your department does and what's going to make you stand out? What do you do that's better, or how are you going to do it better, differently than others that's going to attract the ultimate customer to your company? That's kind of the foundation for setting a vision. And then I think from there, you start putting a plan together, right? You say, okay, well, if that's my mantra, my mission, that's what I'm going to be doing. How is it that I'm going to get there? What are the steps that I need to do from here to whatever your time frame is, 3 years out, 5 years out, 10 years out, to reach that ultimate vision and goal? At SageSure, we have a vision, we call it our BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goal, of by 2030 being the most admired top 10 property insurer in the United States. So obviously top 10 is pretty straightforward. That's a size thing, and we could measure that. Most admired is a little bit more difficult to measure. And so we have to go out to stakeholders and ask different audiences, what does it mean to be admired? And then hit those goals. I bring that up to say, you have to start making your plan, right? So that was the way to start making our plan, was to say, let's reach out to these stakeholders and understand what it means to be most admired. That sets the bar, right? And so now we know our target. How are we going to move towards that target? What are the steps we need to get there? How long will those steps take, so that you can start planning timelines around those missions and those strategies? And you always have to sort of step back and make sure that you believe in the fundamental vision and reality of that strategy, right? It has to be somewhat attainable. It's okay to make stretch goals, but typically not okay to make impossible goals. So one of the ways that I structure that, and I encourage others to structure that, is break down the financials. Put on a piece of paper how you see this playing out in the numbers. When you say you want to be, and I'll use this example, the top 10 most admired. So top 10 is a number. You can put that down on paper pretty easily. And let's just say that's roughly $4 billion or something by 2030. How is SageSure going to be $4 billion? Like, what would that take? Is that realistic? And what does that mean for growth potential and year over year growth? And how would we go get that growth? Do we have any idea how we would do that? If it's not as hardcore of a number, I still encourage people to turn it into something. So going back to the example of, if you're leading a small department and you're trying to figure out, okay, I want to be the best sales department this company has ever seen or something, or I want to grow our sales by X. You've got a number there. Or I want to find a way to, using another insurance example, I want to find a way to segment risk better. I'm an underwriter or an actuary at an insurance company, and my department wants to do that better. Well, what does better mean? Right? I mean, how are you going to segment risk better? Are you going to find a way to drop the loss ratio by a point? Are you going to find a way to separate risks 20% better than you separated them before? So I think it's always encouraging and good to be pragmatic about it and turn it into some kind of number that you can shoot towards, because it also brings in the realism into play.
Yeah, I hear you saying that we have to be as specific as possible, so that it can become something tangible that we are all really working towards. I'd like to go back just a little bit, and if you could, to help us unpack, how do you even really figure out what you're really good at? Because I get it, as we're defining how we're going to get there, we need to be very specific. We need to make sure we can attain what you're saying, even though it might be a little stretch. Otherwise, we're going to create frustration, is what I hear you saying. But there's some people, like, I know I do make some magic sometimes, and when I'm doing something and I'm dealing with people, but I'm not sure what it is. How do people really understand what it is that they're good at, so they know how to build that vision around that?
Right. It can be challenging at times. I would say that a few things I would do. First, look at your own track record. That sounds really easy and straightforward, but sometimes people don't do that, right? Or sometimes people don't give themselves the credit that they deserve. Look back at how you've done and some of the successes and what you've tended to excel at. I'll use a really old kind of simple example from when I was very young and I was in college. And I went into college and I started off my college career as a computer science major. And so I was at RPI and I was in this room coding a program. Back then you had to go to a computer room to code a program. And I'm sitting there and I'm realizing that I'm taking way longer to do this assignment than everyone else is. Like, my peers are coming in, they're knocking it out, they're out of there in an hour. I was finding all kinds of errors in my program, and I literally spent all night there. I slept in the chair while the system went down for an hour to refresh.
Wow.
They used to do that back then too. And then I woke up and finished it. And that morning, I said to myself, I actually don't think this is for me. I'm obviously not quite as skilled at this as some of my colleagues are. And so I look back at my track record and I said, what have I always sort of been good at? And I also talk to others, get that outside in perspective.
Right.
So I talked to friends and family, and there was a common consensus. Hey, you were always good with math. You were always good with numbers, that sort of thing. And so I decided at that moment that I was either going to be a math teacher or I was going to be an actuary. And I only knew about actuary because my mother happened to be in insurance. Another thing is look at what the industry is doing and see if there's a niche. And then you can see if your skills match that niche. To use the SageSure example, when SageSure was founded in 2009, one of the reasons that we decided to do what we did was because we saw that the marketplace wasn't particularly great at understanding and pricing hurricane risk.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's typically something that companies ran away from, or they did it for a while, lost at it, left. There was an opportunity. There was opening. I always encourage people to step out into the marketplace and look back at yourself and say, is there something out there that needs filling? Is there a service that people need? Then look at your skills and your history and say, do I think that's something that could fit?
Right. And not just fill it because there's a need, but obviously SageSure had a trend and a track record in doing really well in that segment of the market, which is why when you found that, hey, this is something that's not being fulfilled, there's a gap here, we do well at it, let's fill it. It's almost like it was waiting for you to show up, right, in that space. So we've been talking about vision and strategy, how to unpack it, and then how to make sure we're very definitive about how we're going to meet that strategy, go after that strategy. You can't do it alone. And so we need to recruit and develop our talent. And talent optimization is something that is near and dear to my heart because sometimes as leaders, we get so inundated with the stuff that we're doing, we forget about the people we've invited to come along with us. So what wisdom do you have for folks around recruiting and developing the talent?
Yeah, that's a great question, Yvette. And before I answer that directly, let me give you a segue from the strategy and vision to that topic. One of the things that I think is critical, and there's obviously many things, but critical in making sure you're successful in executing the strategy. We talked a lot about how to set it and how to, put the goals down on paper and timelines. But then in actually getting there, it usually takes a village, number one, right? Sometimes not. Sometimes you can do things on your own, but that's rare. Number two, you have to hold yourself and those people accountable for getting there. One of the ways to do that is to link the vision and the strategy that's being set in a broader context, whether it be the company or the broader department, all the way down to that person's performance goals and what they need to do. It's important not just because it drives that person towards a target, but because it allows that person to see how their role fits in the broader context of what the company is doing. That, to me, and I think to many people, has always been part and parcel of motivation, right? If you can't see why you're doing what you're doing, it's pretty easy to lose motivation.
Now, that's a healthy approach to what's in it for me, right? Because now you're really defining all the way down to that individual, what's in it for them. That's awesome.
Exactly. So in terms of getting the talent and managing the talent, so let's go back to sort of where it all starts with recruiting. You have to make sure, at least in my mind, that you have to make sure you hire the right skills, but not just skills. You have to hire the right desire and attitude as well.
Love that.
I think it's pretty common to understand, well, obviously you have to hire the skills. You look at someone's resume and you say, do they have the experience? Does it seem to fit what I want them to do? Of course, that's sort of like the ante to play the game. But I think as important with that and potentially as a supplement to that, making it even more important is this person going to fit the values and the attitude that our organization has? Do they have a desire to really do this? And are they going to move the ball forward, be someone who's collaborative if your organization has a collaborative style? How are they going to fit with the broader group? That's something that we typically look for. We try as much as possible. Well, I wouldn't say we try. We do as much as possible ask that in ways that bring that out in the recruiting process. We ask for examples. We ask for, give me an example of something you ran where you did X, Y, Z. You can get a little bit more engagement from the person. One thing that's difficult about recruiting is you don't get to know the person that well unless it happens to be someone you knew.
Right.
That's why usually it's more successful hiring people you knew because there's a lot of experience there. But if not, you might know this person for a couple of hours, in some interviews. So you really have to draw it out of him. The other thing I would encourage people to do is bring a broad panel to that recruitment process and a diverse panel. When I say a diverse panel, I mean it in the broad and true sense of the word. I don't want a panel of interviewers who just look different. That's great, but I actually want them to be different.
Right.
I want people who have different backgrounds and perspectives and are coming at this candidate in different ways to really see things that you probably wouldn't see or someone like you probably wouldn't see. Those are my thoughts on recruitment. And then, of course, once you bring the person on board, then there's, the whole development life cycle.
And that's powerful what you just said, because a lot of times we don't really define our cultures or understand our cultures enough to know what that fit is. And so when we say, oh, are you a good fit? It just seems like something ambiguous out here. And that's why people come and attack that whole word about fit, right? Because what do you mean by fit? And you can't explain it. But you really articulate it in a very powerful way. We know what our culture is. We know what makes us successful. We know what has bound us together as individuals to meet this mission. And therefore, are you having the same type of desires and motivation and skills, as you said, as well, to contribute to this, what we're doing, and keeping the culture in a healthy way? And I love that. And I definitely think that the whole panel interview is a powerful one. I used to participate in panel interviews, and it really does help us to hear from different perspectives, as you said. So culture and fit is not about everybody being identically the same and speaking the same language and, all that, looking the same. It's not about that. It's about having the core or those values that are equal to making this organization successful and to be successful as an individual. So when you bring the right people in, how do you make sure they're supported well in the organization?
Yeah. Great question. So first of all, I want to address something you said, because your question about culture is a really good one. I have to admit, there was a time in my career when I was younger that I thought the whole culture and values thing seemed a little hokey. I didn't quite get it. And I have to admit, I get it now. I get it, after being in a position of leadership and bringing people into an organization and understanding why it's important has really brought it to light. And I'll give you another example from my current employer. At SageSure, we have 3 values, and they'll take a little explaining, but you'll see where I'm going with this. Our 3 values are: we are fountains, we don't try, and we run down the hall. And the first one on we are fountains, the point of that one is that we're supportive and uplifters. We when we see a problem, we think of the solutions. We don't get bogged down in the negativity of the problem. We pitch in, we help each other out. We don't try. That's a Star Wars thing for all the Star Wars fans out there. But there is no try. There's either you do it or you don't do it, right? So we commit is basically the point of that. If we say we're going to do something, we're all in, we commit, and we go do it. Obviously, if it's a long-term project and something comes up and you realize you have to pivot, that's important. But we commit. And then we run down the hall, meaning we put our customers' needs above ours most of the time. I mean, obviously with financial respect in there, but we have a sense of urgency when it comes to issues and resolving those issues for our customers and our clients. The reason I bring those up is because that sets the tone for what we say when we say we're trying to find somebody who fits our culture.
Right.
They have to be somebody who gets that and would fit that. Going back to, okay, now the person's on board and we're going to grow as a company, and therefore these people have to grow with us. I think fundamentally, you have to realize that the biggest asset that a company has is its people. And without people, you're not going anywhere. You wouldn't exist. And so if your company is going to grow, so must your people, and vice versa. Like they're intrinsically tied. You can't have a vision of taking your company from $1 million to $10 million, but not have your people develop. So as part of that, you have to, and again, this ties back to the whole vision and strategy. You have to ask yourself, where I'm going, what does that need in terms of potentially different skills, or potentially different branches of ways of doing things? And so how must my people adapt to where we're going, and what skills are they going to need to get there? And we do a lot of things like e-learning and other ways of learning in a more sort of quote unquote classroom setting. But then we also do a lot of, on the job type training where we give our people opportunities to to rise. I mean, and that's what I would encourage anyone to do is if you see potential in somebody, help them theoretically with the learning, but then also put it in practice with an opportunity that could use that and push that person to get there with the right support. My management style has always been relatively hands-off. I try to encourage people and give them the guidance that they need, but let them push, maybe even fail a little bit, and, be there to help them out, support them, and continue to push them along. I think you have to understand where the company is going, and then what does that mean for where our people need to go, whether it's new technologies, new skills, whatever.
And we can't just look at that on the global perspective of the people. It really requires us to know our people, right? Because if I don't know every individual, then I can't meet the needs of those individuals. And even knowing the individual may bring many opportunities where I find something across the whole gamut of my team that everybody needs. And I think sometimes we think, oh, who has time for all this individualized developing, right? But it's like sometimes you're going to find where it's like across the board, if you do this type of training or do this type of project where people can really develop in that space, then you're really meeting many needs at one time. That's very, very cool that you all do that. I love that approach. I'm all for it all day long. Because like you said, one, it takes the village, and we've invited these people along the journey. You invited them on your vision. So why not support
Absolutely.
them? Support them. So we've talked about vision, and you've made a really good connection on how recruiting and developing our people support the vision and where you want to go. And then let's talk about what some might call tumultuous times. We've been in some rough roads, not sure what's going to come next. How do we build up that resiliency to keep going, even when you want to give up, or to keep going when it doesn't look like what you anticipated? Because that vision said, okay, we're going to do this, and this will be there, and that'll be there. And, and then it's like, oops, that didn't happen. Or like you mentioned before, I have to pivot. So how do you build up that resiliency, not only for yourself as the individual leader, but for those around you, which also, and talk about the organization as a whole?
Sure. I want to address a comment you made about the individual. That was great, Yvette. You really do have to get to know people well enough to create that individual development. And ideally, sugar on top, I guess, you also create a bond, right, with that person that's stronger than just, employee number 5, 6, 7 type thing. I always like to tell people, if there's a surprise in your performance review, I don't know you well enough, or we haven't talked enough. That's another yardstick I try to use as well. The whole concept of resiliency, and you mentioned pivoting, I guess, to me, it starts with making sure the company is resilient too. It's you have to start there and then get to the people issue as well. Because honestly, if you're not designing a business plan, or you're not designing a goal that's got plan B if something goes wrong, or you're not looking at it from all different perspectives of what could go wrong and making sure you're resilient, then obviously your people aren't going to be resilient if your department or your company is not going to be around or is going to suffer badly.
Right.
You have to have a vision of what might go well and what might not go well. An example I'll give from SageSure is a couple of years ago, one of our carriers was starting to have signs of financial weakness. And we saw that, and we immediately put into play a way to not only have another carrier with enough capacity to take it, but also a method of rolling that business over in an efficient way so as to not disturb the customers. And we were putting that all into play before the company actually went into liquidation. And so when it actually did, we were ready. You have to have that mentality. And I don't mean necessarily having a pessimistic mentality. I just mean having a realistic mentality, like things might go wrong. And if they go wrong, are you going to be ready? And then translating that down to people at an individual level, you have to ask yourself that same question too. Are you leading this employee down a path that could potentially have issues? And are they either not the right person for the role, or you're changing the role in such a way that this is no longer the right person? And if so, expect that and have something ready to manage that. And then also create an environment where people feel respected and feel motivated to do the job that they're doing. I mentioned earlier about understanding the connection of your role to the bigger place. I think that's important. having the right form of work-life balance that works for you is important. The thing about work-life balance, I think, is it's a very individual thing.
Right.
Some people really want a lot of balance in life. Some people are at a point in their life where they're ready to just dive into work for whatever reason. And they're like, okay, I don't mind if I work 50 hours a week as long as you reward me for it.
Right.
So I think that's important too. And I would say reward the agility and reward the progress at the individual level. Again, tie the corporate to the individual. If you are seeing somebody who's really thinks outside the box and is creating different ways of approaching something, is creating ways of being ready if something else doesn't work, reward that, both verbally and if you can also in pay or whatever, but recognize that person and recognize them publicly.
Right.
Do it in such a way that you're taking what you want as your values of resilience and agility, and you're demonstrating that in the way you reward people.
That's amazing. And many important things that you just shared with us, like life changes, life happens, right? And so it's not being pessimistic. The vendor that was there today might not be there tomorrow because of their choice. It might not even be because they made some mistake and had to go out of business. It might just be their time that they're saying, I'm not going to do this anymore, right? The market shifts. And so the demands from our marketer, the people we're marketing to, requires us to shift. And so now what do? So we have to be really ready, talking about having those mitigation. And I love looking for those people who are agile. How well are you at adapting and coming up with and innovative, right? Coming up with ways that help the business really stay vibrant. You have been amazing guests for us today. Thank you so much. The wisdom you've imparted will go a long way, I'm sure, to everyone. If you would just share with us as we start to wrap up, what's next for you in your organization? What would you like us to know in parting words? What would you give someone who's sitting across the screen from us saying, thank you for sharing this wisdom. I want to be a leader and I want to be the best leader I can be. What would you say to that person?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to share today. It's been a great conversation, and I could go on and on about these topics. So happy to share more in the future as well, if you'd like.
Absolutely. I would like.
I took on this role in 2018, and like you, I had a wonderful career at a wonderful company at Travelers, who gave me great opportunities and really prepared me for all of the different background and readiness that I needed to do this. And I've been very grateful to have this opportunity. And that actually brings up something that I do want to say, which is remember gratitude. I think hopefully most people listening have a job. If you're a believer, thank God, for that job every day and go to work with a sense of gratitude. That changes your perspective. At least for me, I know it changes my perspective every day when I make sure to be grateful in the morning before starting work. I'd say understand what your dreams are in terms of your career and your leadership and your potential, and start putting down on paper the plan to go achieve that dream. A lot of what we talked about was really, where does the company want to be? Where do you want to be? How do you get there? And then how do you do that for the people? Because I think if you have the passion to want to do that for yourself, and you're hopefully not a selfish person, you're a selfless person, you would want to do that for others too, right? So you can apply that same skill to driving yourself, to developing the people who work for you. They will also be grateful, and together you'll achieve a lot.
Awesome. Thank you so much again for joining us, and you will be back. You will be back. This is Yvette C. Owens of InteSoul Leadership. I'm so glad you joined us. Would you please subscribe, share this podcast with others as you see it, as it comes across your timeline. We are really here to help you, the leader, so that you can help others, because as a leader, you are impacting other people's lives by the products and services that you provide, as well as those that you have invited to help you fulfill the vision. And I want to invite you to pick up my latest book called Unlock Your Leadership Potential. It's a 30-day journal with some daily prompts around how you can really get into the depth of vision performance, authentic communication, empowering you and your people, as well as adaptive resiliency. And it all takes focus. It really does. And so we talk about decision making. There is about how to have empathy, is all the things that great leaders do on a daily basis. This journal will help you, remind you. Some of us just need to be reminded. So pick it up. You can pick it up on my website at DestinySpeak.com. So thank you again, Victor, for joining us. Thank you all for joining us. Remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of InteSoul Leadership.